My son took my $28 million Palm Beach villa and gave it to his wife's family. This is theirs now, so do not ever show your face here. His wife laughed. You belong in a nursing home, not a palace. I smiled and nodded. When her family arrived with 3 moving trucks, the surprise waiting inside made her drop the keys. I am Simon, 70 years old, and I am still standing after my own flesh and blood tried to bury me alive. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind ungrateful people exactly who built the ground they walk on. The crystal chandelier in my foyer vibrated as the heavy mahogany front door slammed shut. I stood perfectly still on the landing of the grand staircase. My son Aaron did not look up at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the imported Italian marble beneath his expensive leather shoes. The movers will be here in 20 minutes, Aaron announced. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings. We need this space cleared immediately. Megan. His wife stepped over the threshold. She brushed past Aaron with an air of absolute entitlement. She did not come alone. Her parents, Thomas and Barbara, followed closely behind her. Thomas dragged a heavy leather suitcase across the pristine floor. He left a faint black scuff mark near the entryway. He looked up at my walls, sneering at the African art collection I had spent years curating. We will need to take all this tribal stuff down, Thomas said dismissively. It really clashes with a modern aesthetic. Barbara nodded in agreement. She ran her hands over the silk wallpaper, her eyes wide with unrestrained greed. We are moving my parents into the master suite, Megan declared. She crossed her arms and looked up at me with a smirk that barely masked her contempt. This house is simply too large for a man in your condition. You belong in a nursing home, not a palace. We have already selected a facility for you. Aaron packed your bags. I looked at Aaron. He was a 35-year-old executive vice president of my company. I had paid for his Ivy League education, his luxury cars, and the very suit he wore. I had shielded him from the harsh realities of the world. You packed my bags, I stated. Aaron shifted his weight uncomfortably. Dad, your memory is slipping. You left the stove on twice last month. You are becoming a liability to yourself. Megan's parents sold their house in Ohio. They are going to live here and help us manage the estate. It is the logical choice. I did not leave the stove on. I had fired their personal chef because Aaron refused to pay her salary out of his massive bonus. That forced me to cook my own meals for the first time in 10 years. They were using my independence against me. Barbara walked past me into the living room. She ran her fingers over the grand piano. It was Cynthia's piano. My late wife had played that instrument every Sunday evening until the cancer took her strength. Barbara hit a discordant key. The sound echoed painfully in my ears. I remembered Cynthia teaching Aaron how to play on that very bench. She had poured her love into him, hoping to raise a man of honor. I was grateful in that moment that she was not alive to witness this betrayal. This will have to go, Barbara said loudly to her husband. It takes up far too much space. We can put a wet bar here instead. A cold, heavy stone settled in my chest. I looked down at my hands. They were deeply scarred. I built a maritime logistics empire from a single rusted barge back in 1982. I spent decades facing closed doors. I navigated rooms filled with men who looked exactly like Thomas. I dealt with bankers who refused to shake my hand simply because I am a black man. I broke down those systemic barriers and built a fortune so Aaron could walk into any room in America without bowing his head. He repaid my lifetime of sacrifice by handing my keys to people who despised me. I did not shout. I did not demand respect or list the sacrifices I had made to put a roof over their heads. Anger is a weapon for the powerless. Silence is the tool of the architect. I walked slowly down the stairs. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass keyring. I placed it gently on the marble console table. I will not cause a scene, I said evenly. The house is yours. I will leave immediately. Megan laughed. It was a sharp, triumphant sound. See, I told you his mind was too far gone to fight back. Let the nurses deal with him. As I turned to leave, Thomas stepped into my path. He handed me a cheap printed brochure for a state-run nursing facility. "Do not worry, old man," Thomas said with a condescending pat on my shoulder. "They have bingo on Tuesdays. You will fit right in." I took the brochure from his hands. I folded it neatly and placed it in my pocket. I looked at Thomas, then at my son. Aaron finally met my eyes, but he quickly looked away, ashamed, but unwilling to stop the theft. I walked out the front door into the suffocating humidity of the Florida morning. I did not look back at the villa. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove away. I drove precisely 3 blocks before pulling over to the side of the road under the heavy shade of a banyan tree. I pulled my phone from my jacket and dialed my corporate attorney, Jonathan. He answered on the first ring. "Jonathan," and I said calmly. "They took the bait. Aaron and his in-laws are occupying the villa right now." A heavy sigh came through the receiver. "Simon, I warned you about this. If Aaron establishes residency in that house, evicting him will require a 6-month court battle." "I have no intention of evicting him," I replied. "Execute the asset transfer immediately. Shift the corporate debt exactly as we planned." "Are you absolutely certain?" Jonathan asked. "Simon, if we proceed, the board will initiate a full forensic audit. They will discover Aaron embezzled from the employee pension fund to buy Megan's sports cars. He will face federal charges. Once I file these documents, Aaron will be personally liable for the deficit. It will destroy him." "A thief is a thief, even if he shares my last name," I replied. "Last week, Aaron begged me to sign the deed of the villa over to him. He claimed he wanted to avoid inheritance taxes and protect the family asset. I signed the transfer. He thought he was outsmarting an old man. He did not read the addendum on the final page. I legally bound the estate to the commercial deficit of his failed tech subsidiary. By accepting the deed to the villa, Aaron accepted $30 million of toxic corporate debt. The house is collateral. The bank is going to call the loan due immediately." "He destroyed himself," I told Jonathan. "File the papers." I hung up the phone and looked at the dashboard clock. The moving company was scheduled to arrive at the villa in exactly 5 minutes. Aaron had insisted on handling all the moving expenses using his platinum corporate credit card. He loved swiping that card. It made him feel powerful. It made him feel like he had earned the wealth he was currently giving away. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from the corporate banking application. A transaction attempt for $4,000 at a local moving company had just been processed. The status flashed bright red across my screen. Declined. A second later. Aaron's name lit up my caller ID. He was calling me. I watched the screen ring once. I watched it ring twice. The machine had flashed red, cutting off his endless supply of my money. The empire he thought he stole was already collapsing around him, and he did not even know the full extent of his ruin yet. I took a slow, deep breath, pressed the green button, and raised the phone to my ear. The condo was an unassuming 2-bedroom unit on the 14th floor of a concrete high-rise in downtown West Palm Beach. I purchased it 5 years ago through a blind holding company. Aaron did not know this place existed. Megan did not know it existed. To them, my entire universe was the oceanfront villa they had just stolen. I poured boiling water over loose black tea leaves, watching the dark liquid steep. The city stretched out below my window, a grid of asphalt and glass completely detached from the manicured lawns of my former neighborhood. I took a slow sip. The silence in the room was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding miles away. My cell phone sat flat on the kitchen island. It began to vibrate, the harsh buzzing sound cutting through the quiet. The screen illuminated with Aaron's name. I let it ring. The screen went dark, then instantly lit up again. He called a second time. then a third. I watched the device vibrate across the granite surface, tracking his escalating panic. Aaron had never been denied a single thing in his 35 years of life. Whenever he faced a hurdle, he swiped a piece of plastic bearing the name of the company I built. He swiped it for his designer watches, his sports cars, and the lavish vacations Megan demanded. Today, that plastic was nothing more than useless plastic. On the 12th consecutive call, I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to him breathe. "Dad, what is going on with the corporate accounts?" Aaron shouted through the speaker. His voice cracked with a hysterical pitch I had not heard since he was a teenager. "I just tried to pay the moving company with my Platinum Executive card. The machine declined the transaction. I handed them my secondary corporate card, and it was declined too. The lead mover threatened to dump Megan's parents' furniture on the street. I called the corporate bank to override the fraud alert, and the representative told me my access was permanently revoked. You have to call them right now and fix this. Your access was revoked because you are no longer an authorized signer for the company," I explained, taking another slow sip of my tea. "You are completely locked out of the financial system." Aaron let out a ragged breath. "What are you talking about? I am the executive vice president of this company. I am second in command. You cannot just cut off my access because you are angry about the house. You were the executive vice president," I corrected him. "I officially resigned as chairman of the board at 8 o'clock this morning. But prior to stepping down, I ordered an immediate unannounced forensic audit of the entire logistics division. I directed the independent auditors to look very closely at the employee pension fund." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute thick with the sudden realization of his own ruin. "I spent 40 years standing shoulder to shoulder with dock workers, crane operators, and deckhands," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Men and women who broke their backs loading cargo under the brutal Florida sun to make our shipping lines profitable. That pension fund was their promised future. The audit discovered that you embezzled over $4 million from their retirement accounts over the past 2 years. You stole the sweat of working people to finance Megan's luxury investments, her designer wardrobes, and those useless shell companies she calls businesses. You lied to the board," Aaron whispered. His voice trembled with a mixture of terror and outrage. I did not embezzle anything. I took an executive loan. I planned to pay it back as soon as Megan's startup turned a profit. You have no right to do this to me. An unapproved withdrawal hidden behind forged accounting records is not a loan, Aaron. It is a federal felony," I stated. The board of directors held an emergency meeting after reviewing the audit. "They terminated your employment effective immediately. You no longer have a salary, you no longer have corporate protection, and the legal department is currently preparing to hand the audit over to the authorities. You stole from the people who built the ground you walk on, and you are going to face the consequences alone." "You cannot do this to me," Aaron screamed, the sound echoing harshly through my phone speaker. "I am your son. We are in your house right now. Megan's parents are unpacking their lives here. You cannot leave us with nothing." "That is exactly where I want you to be," I said coldly. 2 weeks ago, you came to my office and begged me to sign the deed of the Palm Beach villa over to you. You claimed you wanted to avoid massive inheritance taxes. You swore you were trying to protect our most valuable family asset from the government. You shoved the paperwork in front of me and demanded my signature. I signed the transfer without a fight. "Yes, I own the house," Aaron yelled triumphantly, grasping at the last shred of power he thought he held. "The deed is in my name. The county clerk filed it yesterday. You cannot touch us here. I can call the police and have you arrested for trespassing if you ever step foot on this driveway again." "You own the house," I agreed. "However, you were so eager to snatch the property that you failed to read the addendum on the final page of the transfer agreement. I legally bound the estate to the commercial deficit of your failed tech subsidiary. You generated a massive hole of toxic corporate debt that you thought I would quietly pay off for you. Instead, I tied that liability directly to the deed of the villa. By accepting the property, you personally accepted $30 million in immediate unpayable debt. The house is the collateral. The bank was notified of the transfer this morning, and they are calling the loan due immediately. I listened to the sound of Aaron dropping his phone on a hard surface. He did not hang up. I could hear his panicked breathing from across the room. I could hear Megan's sharp, demanding voice asking him what was wrong. "The bank is foreclosing on the villa," Aaron gasped to his wife. "He locked my accounts. We have $30 million in debt, and the bank is taking the house. We have nowhere to go." I heard Megan curse loudly. Her arrogant facade cracked instantly under the weight of financial ruin. "Do not panic," Megan snapped at him, her voice dripping with venomous calculation. "I is a 70-year-old man. He just signed away his assets and destroyed his own company. No sane person does that. We just need to prove his mind is completely gone. Call my uncle at the courthouse. We are going to file a medical injunction today. We will lock him in a ward and take it all back." I pressed a single button and ended the call. I ended the call and set the phone down on the granite counter. The silence in my condo was absolute, a sharp contrast to the frantic desperation I knew was unfolding inside my former home. I had cornered them. But a cornered animal is incredibly dangerous, and Megan was a creature of ruthless ambition. I had heard her sharp, demanding voice ordering Aaron to call her uncle at the courthouse. I knew exactly what they were planning to do. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window of my 14th floor condo, watching the streetlights of West Palm Beach flicker out as dawn broke over the Atlantic Ocean. I drank my black tea and waited. At exactly 7 in the morning, a sharp, heavy knock echoed through my hallway. I unlocked the door. My corporate attorney, Jonathan, stepped inside. He carried a battered leather briefcase and his face was drawn tight with stress. He did not bother with pleasantries. He walked directly to the kitchen island, unlatched his briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of court documents, bearing the blue stamp of the county clerk. "Megan's uncle works in the probate division," Jonathan said, his breathing slightly elevated. "I got a tip from a paralegal I trust. They pushed this paperwork through the system at 6 o'clock this morning. Aaron filed an emergency medical injunction against you." I looked down at the documents. The bold legal print requested a complete and total medical conservatorship. Aaron was petitioning the court to be named my sole legal guardian. "If a judge approves this on Friday morning," Jonathan explained, leaning over the granite island, "Aaron will be granted absolute legal authority over your life. He will argue that you signed the $30 million corporate debt transfer while in a state of severe cognitive decline. He will use this conservatorship to void your signature, reverse the debt back to the company, and reclaim control of the board." "And what happens to me?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Jonathan swallowed hard. "He will have the legal right to seize your hidden bank accounts, sell your remaining assets, and lock you inside a secure psychiatric facility against your will. You will become a prisoner in your own mind, legally erased from society." I picked up the psychiatric evaluation attached to the back of the legal filing. It detailed a fabricated, aggressive examination. The notes claimed I suffered from violent outbursts, severe memory loss, and a complete inability to manage my own basic financial needs. I looked down at the signature at the bottom of the page. It belonged to a Dr. Aris. "I have never met this man in my entire life," I stated. "My primary care physician is a woman named Dr. Wallace. I had a comprehensive physical and cognitive exam 4 months ago, and my medical records are flawless." "The truth does not matter if they secure a temporary freeze," Jonathan warned. "Judges in this county routinely issue temporary asset freezes when an emergency medical petition is filed just to maintain the status quo while they investigate. A freeze buys Aaron time. It stops the bank from foreclosing on the villa today. Time is the one asset we absolutely cannot afford to give him. We need to strike the killing blow before he ever reaches a courtroom." I turned away from this kitchen island and walked toward my laptop sitting on the dining table. My son inherited his mother's relentless ambition, I said, opening the computer. But he inherited absolutely none of my meticulous attention to detail. I explained to Jonathan that when Aaron first began plotting to take over the estate, he made a very amateur mistake. He went into the utility closet of the villa and physically cut the main fiber optic internet cables. He thought cutting the Wi-Fi would permanently blind the smart home features and the security cameras I had installed around the perimeter and inside my home office. He assumed my security system was a standard off-the-shelf consumer product. I was incredibly wrong. I had the entire security matrix hardwired into a concealed independent cellular backup network. The cameras never went offline. They had been recording directly to a secure encrypted cloud server every single second of every single day. I logged into the security portal. Jonathan stood over my shoulder staring at the screen. I navigated to the home office camera and scrubbed the timeline backward to Wednesday morning, stopping at exactly 2 o'clock. The footage buffered for a second before rendering the room in sharp high-definition color. The audio clicked on capturing the ambient hum of the air conditioning. On the screen, Aaron and Megan were sitting on my leather sofa. Across from them, sitting directly in my custom executive chair, was a man wearing a casual suit carrying a black medical bag. Dr. Eris. I increased the volume on my laptop. "This guarantees he cannot contest the transfer," Megan said on the video, her voice dripping with venom. "The old man will be locked in a ward by the weekend. We will have total control of the company assets." Aaron leaned forward and slid a thick, bulging manila envelope across my mahogany desk. Dr. Eris picked it up and opened the flap. The high-definition camera clearly captured the tight stacks of $100 bills inside. The doctor smiled, pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, and signed his name at the very bottom of the psychiatric evaluation. "Thank you for your extreme discretion," Aaron said on the footage, shaking the fraudulent doctor's hand. Jonathan stared at my laptop screen in absolute silence. The sheer brazenness of the crime was staggering. I did not celebrate. I simply hit the download button and saved the video file directly to a secure external drive. I pulled the drive from the port and handed it to my attorney. "Do not wait for a local judge," I instructed Jonathan. "Do not bother with the county court. I want you to send this video file directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically the Financial Crimes Division. I also wanted a copy sent to the State Medical Licensing Board and the federal bank auditors who hold the mortgage on the villa." Jonathan took the drive, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "By bribing a physician to commit medical fraud in order to alter a massive commercial bank loan, they have elevated this from a civil dispute into a federal conspiracy." "They wanted a war," I said. "I am giving them an execution." Friday morning arrived with a thick, suffocating Florida heat. I parked my unremarkable sedan down the street from my own estate. The car was completely obscured by the heavy shade of a massive oak tree. Jonathan sat in the passenger seat beside me, his briefcase resting on his lap. We watched the front lawn of the villa through the windshield. Thomas and Barbara were standing on the pristine grass holding expensive coffee mugs, pointing at the landscaping, as if they were the new lords of the manor. Megan strutted out of the front door, wearing a designer silk robe, holding a clipboard, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. They were waiting for the final delivery of their old life. In the distance, the loud grinding diesel engines of 3 massive commercial moving trucks rumbled down the exclusive street. The trucks were hauling the entirety of Thomas and Barbara's hoarded belongings from Ohio. They expected to unload their heavy furniture into my master suite. They expected a grand royal welcome to their new life of stolen luxury. Friday morning arrived with a thick and suffocating Florida heat. I sat in the driver's seat of my unmarked sedan. The car was parked half a block away from the wrought iron gates of my Palm Beach villa. The massive branches of an ancient oak tree completely hid my vehicle from view. Jonathan sat in the passenger seat next to me. He held a sleek tablet in his hands, monitoring the live feed from the federal courthouse. Down the street, the loud and heavy grinding of diesel engines shattered the quiet morning air. 3 massive commercial moving trucks turned onto my street. They slowly backed into my wide, circular driveway. The trucks were loaded with the entirety of Thomas and Barbara's lives. They had sold their modest home in Ohio to permanently occupy my master suite. I watched through the windshield as Thomas and Barbara strutted onto the pristine grass of my front lawn. Thomas pointed at the landscaping with a commanding sweep of his hand, directing a crew of sweaty movers on where to carry his heavy oak furniture. He held a ceramic coffee mug, acting as if he had built the entire estate himself. Barbara stood beside him. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, already playing the role of a wealthy socialite. The heavy mahogany front door swung open. Megan marched out onto the portico. She wore a designer silk robe that dragged slightly on the imported stone. She held my brass key ring in her hand, twirling it around her finger like a stolen trophy. She barked orders at the foreman of the moving company, complaining about a smudge on one of the antique mirrors. She felt invincible. She believed the medical injunction Aaron filed at dawn had legally erased my existence. Aaron stepped out of the house a moment later. He did not share his wife's arrogant confidence. He looked pale and exhausted. He kept checking his phone, frantically swiping the screen. He was waiting for a confirmation from the bank that his assets were unfrozen. He did not know the bank was no longer in charge of his accounts. The foreman of the moving company lowered the ramp on the back of the first truck. 2 men carried a large velvet sofa toward the front doors. Before they could reach the porch, the sharp screech of tires echoed down the exclusive street. 4 sleek black SUVs turned the corner at high speed. They did not slow down to admire the architecture. They swerved aggressively into my driveway, completely boxing in the 3 moving trucks. The vehicles formed an impenetrable wall of dark metal and tinted glass. The silent, flashing red and blue lights hidden in their grills illuminated the morning shadows. The movers froze. Thomas dropped his coffee mug on the grass. Megan stopped twirling the keys. She stared at the black vehicles with a look of absolute outrage. She thought this was a mistake. She assumed it was a private security patrol or an overzealous neighborhood association complaining about the moving trucks. She marched aggressively down the steps. "You are trespassing on private property," Megan screamed, pointing her finger at the lead vehicle. "Move your cars immediately. We are in the middle of a massive delivery, and you are blocking the loading zone." The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. 12 men and women wearing tactical vests stepped out onto the driveway. The bold yellow letters on their jackets read FBI. Megan stopped walking. Her mouth hung open. The brass keyring slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the pavement. The lead agent bypassed Megan completely. He did not even look at her. He walked directly toward the portico where my son was standing. Aaron took a step backward, his back hitting the heavy wooden doors of the villa. His face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just watched the floor collapse beneath his feet. "Aaron Vance," the lead agent asked. His voice was sharp and carried easily across the silent lawn. "Yes," Aaron stammered. His eyes darted wildly toward the armed agents surrounding the perimeter of the estate. "I am the owner of this property. Is there a problem here?" "I am Agent Miller with the Financial Crimes Division," the man stated coldly. "We are executing an immediate federal seizure of this property. You accepted the deed to this estate while carrying $30 million in fraudulent corporate debt. You intentionally filed forged loan documents to conceal this liability from the bank." "This is a complete misunderstanding," Megan shrieked. She ran back up the stairs and grabbed her husband's arm. "My husband is a victim. His father suffers from severe dementia. He filed the medical paperwork this morning to protect our family assets from a confused old man." A second agent stepped up onto the porch. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "We have the high-definition security footage of your husband handing an envelope of cash to Dr. Aris at 2 o'clock on Wednesday morning," the second agent said. "Dr. Aris was taken into federal custody 1 hour ago. He has already confessed to accepting a $10,000 bribe to fabricate a psychiatric evaluation. Aaron's knees buckled. He collapsed against the stone pillar of the portico, gasping for air. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent ordered. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud." Aaron sobbed openly as the cold steel clicked shut around his wrists. He looked around in blind panic. "Where is my father?" Aaron begged, his voice cracking. "Please, you have to call my father. He can fix this. He has the money to fix this. It was all a mistake." I opened the door of my sedan. I stepped out into the humid morning air. I walked slowly down the sidewalk and turned into the long driveway. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my leather shoes. The federal agents parted slightly to let me through. Jonathan walked right beside me, holding his briefcase. Megan locked eyes with me. The smug, arrogant smile she had worn when she kicked me out of my own home was entirely erased. She looked at me with pure, suffocating horror. "You knew," Megan whispered. Her entire body was shaking uncontrollably. "You set us up from the very beginning." "You set yourselves up," I replied. My voice was calm and steady. "You demanded a palace. I simply allowed you to inherit the exact foundation you built. It turns out your foundation was made of stolen pension funds and bribed doctors." Thomas stepped forward. His face was flushed bright red with a mixture of anger and absolute terror. He pointed a trembling hand at the moving trucks blocking the driveway. "We sold our home in Ohio," Thomas yelled. "We transferred all our savings to pay for these movers. We have absolutely nowhere to go. You cannot just leave us on the street." I looked at the man who had mocked me and told me I belonged in a care facility. "I highly recommend the state-run nursing home you suggested for me," I told Thomas quietly. "I hear they have bingo on Tuesdays. You will fit right in." The steel door of the interrogation room was heavy. It clicked shut behind me with a hollow metallic echo that felt entirely appropriate for a tomb. I walked into the cramped concrete space. The air smelled of industrial bleach and stale sweat. It was a stark contrast to the ocean breeze and imported Italian marble Aaron had claimed as his own just 2 hours ago. My son sat at the center of the room. His hands were cuffed to a steel ring bolted directly into the metal table. I was no longer wearing the $3,000 tailored suit he had put on that morning. The federal agents had stripped him of his executive armor. He wore a faded standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He looked small. He looked terrified. When he heard my footsteps, Aaron snapped his head up. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. A wave of profound relief washed over his face. He actually smiled. He thought I was his savior. He thought the man he had tried to lock in a psychiatric ward at 2 o'clock in the morning had come to pay his bail. "Dad," Aaron gasped. He leaned forward as far as the steel chain would allow. "Thank God you are here. I knew you would not let them do this to me." Jonathan must have explained it to the agents. "This is all a massive misunderstanding. The bank auditors made a mistake with the pension fund numbers. And the doctor Megan set that up. She panicked about the house. You have to tell them I am innocent. Have you paid the bail yet? I need to get out of here. The food is disgusting, and they will not let me make any phone calls." I did not say a word. I pulled out the metal chair opposite him and sat down. I looked at the boy I had raised. I had spent decades clearing the path for him so he would never have to sit in a room like this. I had shielded him from the consequences of his actions for 35 years. That shield was officially gone. I placed a thick manila folder onto the center of the metal table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. I rested my scarred hands on top of it. "I am not here to pay your bail, Aaron," I said. My voice was calm and steady, devoid of the anger he expected. "I am here to deliver your termination paperwork." Aaron stared at me. The relief evaporated from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Inside this folder is a complete unredacted copy of the forensic audit," I continued. "It details exactly how you diverted $4 million from the retirement accounts of the men and women who built our company." You used shell companies registered under Megan's name to launder the money. You bought her a sports car while my crane operators were worrying about their mortgages. That is not a misunderstanding. That is federal wire fraud. Dad, please, Aaron whispered. His voice broke. I was going to put the money back. I just needed a bridge loan for Megan's lifestyle brand. She was pressuring me. Do not blame your wife for the absolute lack of a spine in your own body, I told him coldly. Megan is a parasite, but you are the one who opened the door and invited her to feast. And when your theft caught up to you, you did not confess. You did not ask for help. You attempted to steal my house. When that failed, you handed $10,000 to a fraudulent doctor to declare me insane. You were willing to lock your own father in a psychiatric ward for the rest of his life, just to cover your tracks. Aaron began to sob openly. The tears streamed down his face and dripped onto the metal table. I have nothing left, Dad. The feds froze my personal accounts. The bank seized the villa. I do not have a single dollar to my name. If you do not post my bail, they are going to transfer me to the federal holding facility tonight. You know what happens to people like me in there. You cannot let them take me. I looked at his shaking hands. You built this cage yourself, Aaron. You thought my silence was weakness. You thought my age made me stupid. You thought because I gave you everything I would never have the stomach to take it away. You forgot that before I was an executive, I was a dock worker. I know exactly how to cut loose dead weight when a ship is sinking. I am not posting your bail. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. You are going to sit in this cell and face the exact reality you created. Aaron thrashed against his restraints. The metal chain rattled violently against the bolted ring. He was desperate, grasping for any possible leverage he could find to manipulate me. He pulled the only card he had left. Mom would never let you do this, Aaron screamed. His face turned bright red. If Cynthia were alive, she would be disgusted with you. She loved me. She always protected me. She would never abandon her only son in a concrete cell. You are breaking her heart by leaving me here. The temperature in this room plummeted. I stood up slowly. I pushed the metal chair back. It screeched against the concrete floor. I walked around the table and leaned down until my face was inches from his. Do not ever put your mother's name in your mouth again, I said softly. The quiet intensity of my voice made him freeze. Your mother was a woman of absolute honor. She spent her weekends volunteering at community kitchens. She taught you how to play the piano you tried to throw out on the lawn today. She raised you to be a man of integrity, a man who respected the hard work of others. If Cynthia were alive today, she would not be disgusted with me. She would be thoroughly ashamed of the coward sitting in front of me. Aaron shrank back in his chair. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head side to side. You traded your family for a woman who despises us and a lifestyle you could not afford, I told him. You are no longer my responsibility. I turned my back on my son and walked toward the heavy steel door. Dad, wait, Aaron cried out. Please do not leave me here. Dad. I knocked twice on the glass. The guard opened the door. I walked out into the busy precinct hallway and let the heavy door click shut, cutting off the sound of Aaron sobbing. I walked out of the building and stepped into the afternoon sun, breathing in the air of a man who had successfully excised a tumor from his life. Meanwhile, 30 miles away at Palm Beach International Airport, Megan dragged her designer suitcase up to the first-class ticketing counter. She wore oversized sunglasses and glanced nervously over her shoulder. She handed her burgundy passport to the ticketing agent, demanding a seat on the next direct flight to Paris. The agent scanned the document. A loud, sharp beep erupted from the terminal computer. The screen flashed bright red. The agent stepped back and signaled to 2 armed Transportation Security Administration officers approaching rapidly from behind. I watched the live security feed from the comfort of my downtown condominium. Jonathan sat beside me at the kitchen island. He had tapped into his network of federal contacts to track Megan's flight status. Megan did not make it to Paris. Two armed agents from the Transportation Security Administration intercepted her directly at the first-class ticketing counter. They confiscated her burgundy passport right out of her hands. The agents informed her she was now classified as a material witness and a primary person of interest in an ongoing federal wire fraud investigation. She was forbidden from leaving the state. Megan tried to hail a premium car service to escape the humiliation of the busy airport terminal. She handed the driver her platinum card. The machine declined it instantly. She tried a second card, and then a third. Every single account linked to her name was completely frozen. She was forced to board a public transit bus to make her way back to Palm Beach. When Megan finally walked up the long gravel driveway of my villa, her designer silk robe clung to her sweating body. She looked like a defeated ghost. The federal agents had already strung bright yellow police tape across my heavy mahogany front doors. The three massive commercial moving trucks were gone. The moving company had demanded their final payment upon arrival. When Thomas and Barbara could not produce a working credit card, the moving crew refused to carry a single item inside. They dumped the cargo right there on the grass. Thomas and Barbara were sitting on a pile of crushed cardboard boxes. The scorching Florida sun beat down on them mercilessly. They looked absolutely miserable. The royal estate they thought they conquered had become their personal parking lot. Through the high-definition audio feed of my external security cameras, I heard Thomas unleash a tirade of absolute fury. The polite and refined country club demeanor he had worn just a few hours ago had completely evaporated. He stood up from his crushed cardboard box, his face a violent shade of crimson. "You told us this was a done deal!" Thomas screamed. He pointed a shaking finger directly at his daughter's face. "You told us your husband secured the estate. We sold our home in Ohio for this. We liquidated our retirement accounts to pay those movers to haul our lives down here. We have absolutely nothing left." Megan backed away, holding her hands up defensively. "Dad, please calm down." Aaron made a mistake with the corporate accounts. The old man manipulated the deed to trap us. We just need a good lawyer to untangle the medical conservatorship and force him out. Barbara stood up, clutching a cheap plastic water bottle. She slapped the clipboard right out of Megan's hand. "Do not talk to us about lawyers," Barbara shrieked. "Your husband is sitting in a federal holding cell. The federal agent told us the house is seized for mortgage fraud. You dragged us down here to live in a mansion, and now we are squatting on a public sidewalk." The illusion of their perfect white picket fence family shattered right there on my front lawn. They turned on each other like starving wolves. Thomas demanded Megan fix the situation immediately. He ordered her to call her wealthy friends from the yacht club and find them a hotel. Megan pulled out her phone, her hands shaking violently. She dialed number after number. I watched the camera feed as she grew more frantic with every rejected call. Her high society friends had already seen the news breaking on the local networks. No one wanted to be associated with a federal wire fraud investigation. She was completely isolated. Thomas paced back and forth across the grass, yelling that she had ruined their lives for a taste of luxury she never earned. My personal cell phone lit up on the kitchen island. The caller identification displayed Megan's name. She was desperate enough to call the man she had just tried to lock in a psychiatric ward. I pressed the answer button and put her on speaker so Jonathan could hear every word. "Simon, please," Megan sobbed. Her voice was thick with manufactured tears and heavy desperation. "You have to stop this. You are destroying our family over a massive misunderstanding. Aaron loves you. We love you. We were only trying to get you the medical help you desperately needed. You cannot just leave my parents sitting on the sidewalk. They are innocent in all of this." I listened to her hollow, manipulative pleas without an ounce of pity. "You tried to throw me into a concrete cell and steal the legacy I built from the ground up," I said, my voice ice cold. "Your parents stood in my foyer and mocked me. They measured my living room for a wet bar while telling me I belonged in a nursing home. They are not innocent. They simply gambled on your greed and lost everything. Simon." I am begging you, Megan cried. I do not negotiate with thieves, I replied. You are officially homeless, and your husband is facing federal prison. I strongly suggest you find a very comfortable park bench. I disconnected the line. On the security feed, I saw Megan drop to her knees on the grass, burying her face in her hands. But her despair did not last long. Her survival instinct took over. She wiped her face, stood up, and dialed a new number. Jonathan's phone buzzed beside me. He checked his secure industry network. She just retained Bradley Reed. Jonathan said, his eyes narrowing as he read the alert. He is a high-priced, completely unethical defense attorney, known for playing dirty. He just requested a copy of that forged psychiatric evaluation. He is planning to go on the offensive. He wants to validate the fake dementia diagnosis in open court to discredit you completely. The federal courthouse in West Palm Beach was a fortress of polished granite and cold air conditioning. I sat in the second row of the gallery dressed in my tailored Navy suit. I watched Aaron being led into the courtroom by two armed federal marshals. He wore the same faded orange jumpsuit from the holding cell. He kept his head down, refusing to look in my direction. Megan sat directly behind the defense table. She was no longer wearing her expensive silk robes. She wore a conservative beige dress, desperately trying to project the image of a terrified and innocent housewife. Beside her sat Bradley Reed. He was an expensive, aggressively slick defense attorney who specialized in making guilty people look like martyrs. The judge, an older man with a no-nonsense reputation, called the emergency bail hearing to order. Bradley Reed immediately stood up and approached the podium. He did not ask for leniency. He went on the offensive. Your Honor, my client. Aaron is a victim of a tragic family crisis, Bradley stated. His voice echoed loudly and confidently across the courtroom. He pointed a finger directly at me. The man sitting in the gallery, my client's father, is suffering from severe and aggressive dementia. He engineered this entire financial collapse in a state of deep senile paranoia. Bradley pulled a document from his briefcase and waved it in the air for the judge to see. We have a certified psychiatric evaluation signed by Dr. Aris Bradley, continued. This document proves that Simon is completely detached from reality. He transferred toxic corporate debt to his own son because his rotting mind convinced him his family was plotting against him. Aaron only accepted the deed to the estate to protect his sick father from ruthless predators. My client is a devoted son who is being persecuted simply because his father forgot how to distinguish reality from delusion. We request immediate bail and a full dismissal of the wire fraud charges based on the undeniable fact that the primary witness is medically incompetent. Megan dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. She was playing the role of the heartbroken daughter-in-law perfectly. She actually believed her expensive lawyer had just outsmarted me. She believed that a piece of paper bought for $10,000 was going to erase my 40 years of building a maritime empire. I did not blink. I simply looked at Jonathan sitting next to me on the wooden bench. It was time to spring the trap. Jonathan stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket slowly, carrying his battered leather briefcase to the front of the courtroom. He did not look angry or defensive. He looked like a surgeon preparing to make a very precise incision. He addressed the judge with absolute calm. Your Honor, Jonathan, began opposing counsel, has just presented a fascinating narrative. However, it is built entirely on a foundation of perjury and federal medical fraud. Jonathan unlatched his briefcase. He pulled out 3 thick bound folders and handed them directly to the court clerk. The documents you are receiving are comprehensive neurological and psychiatric evaluations, Jonathan explained. He made sure to project his voice so every reporter sitting in the back of the room could hear him clearly. They were conducted independently by 3 of the top cognitive specialists in the state of Florida. The most recent evaluation was completed just 48 hours ago. All 3 certified physicians have cleared Simon of any cognitive decline whatsoever. His mental acuity is flawless. He is in perfect psychological health. Bradley Reed scoffed loudly and leaned against the defense table. Anyone can hire a private doctor to write a favorable report, Bradley argued with a dismissive wave of his hand. My client has a sworn evaluation from Dr. Aris that was filed with the probate court before this circus even began. That is correct, Jonathan agreed smoothly. You do have a document signed by Dr. Aris, which is why I would like to direct the attention of the court to the supplementary evidence folder. Jonathan handed a smaller file to the clerk. Your Honor, the defense is attempting to use a medical proxy to invalidate $30 million of legitimate corporate debt transfer. They claim Simon is paranoid, but paranoia is an irrational fear. What Simon experienced was a highly rational response to a calculated betrayal. Aaron did not file that medical injunction to protect his father. He filed it to steal his father's company after he was caught embezzling $4 million from the employee pension fund. Aaron turned pale. He gripped the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned white. He realized Jonathan was not just defending my mental health. Jonathan was laying the groundwork to ensure Aaron never walked out of that building as a free man. Megan stopped pretending to cry. She sat up straight, her eyes darting frantically between her slick attorney and the judge. She realized her uncle at the courthouse could not save her from the federal evidence Jonathan was about to unleash. Jonathan turned toward the large multimedia screen mounted on the courtroom wall. He requested permission to enter Exhibit A into the official record. The judge nodded, adjusting his glasses as the large screen flickered to life. The high-definition security footage from my home office began to play. The timestamp in the corner clearly displayed Wednesday morning at 2 o'clock. The entire courtroom watched in dead silence as Aaron and Megan sat on my leather sofa. They watched as Dr. Aris sat in my executive chair. The audio blasted through the court speakers. Everyone heard Megan call me a derogatory name. Everyone heard her state her exact plan to lock me in a medical ward to steal my assets. And then the killing blow played out for the judge to see. Aaron reached across the mahogany desk and handed Dr. Aris a thick envelope stuffed with $100 bills. The doctor smiled, took the bribe, and signed the exact psychiatric evaluation Bradley Reed had just waved in the air. Bradley Reed slowly lowered his hand. He stepped away from Aaron, as if his client had suddenly caught fire. A defense attorney can spin a story, but no attorney can spin high-definition video of a federal crime. The judge slammed his gavel down. His face was a mask of absolute disgust. He looked directly at Aaron. I have seen many desperate criminals in my courtroom, the judge stated coldly. But bribing a medical professional to falsely imprison your own father for financial gain is a new level of depravity. Bail is completely denied. You will remain in federal custody until your trial. Aaron buried his face in his hands and began to weep loudly. The judge was not finished. He turned his attention to the gallery, pointing his gavel directly at Megan. Furthermore, the judge announced the video evidence clearly shows the defendant's wife actively conspiring to commit this fraud. I am directing the federal prosecutor to formally implicate her as a co-conspirator. You are not allowed to leave this jurisdiction. Megan's face went completely slack. The color drained from her cheeks. She stumbled out of the courtroom before the federal marshals could approach her. She knew she was going to prison. But a cornered animal is incredibly dangerous. Knowing her life of luxury was completely over, Megan decided she was going to take my reputation down with her. She pulled out her phone in the courthouse hallway and frantically drafted a twisted, highly defamatory story about me. She sent it directly to the most vicious local gossip blog in Palm Beach, ready to burn my corporate empire to the ground. The notification chimed on my phone before I even left the courthouse parking lot. Megan had hit send. She did not just send her fabricated story to a local gossip blog. She blasted it to every major news outlet and social media platform in South Florida. The headline screamed across the internet. It painted me as a ruthless and senile tyrant who was using his vast fortune to destroy his own flesh and blood. Megan wrote a highly detailed and entirely fictional account of her life inside my family. She claimed I was violently abusive to Aaron during his childhood. She stated my mind was rotting from advanced dementia, and that I had used my billions to bribe federal agents into arresting my innocent son. She painted herself as a terrified mother figure, just trying to protect her aging in-laws from a madman. Within 2 hours, the damage began to spread to the foundation of my maritime logistics empire. I sat at the glass dining table in my downtown condominium. Jonathan paced back and forth across the hardwood floor. His phone was ringing non-stop. The corporate shipping world is a tight and conservative community. They do not tolerate public scandals or unstable leadership. Our largest international freight partner called Jonathan directly. The chief executive of the European shipping conglomerate threatened to pull a $200 million cargo contract. He said his board of directors would not do business with a company whose founder was publicly melting down in a messy federal family feud. Megan knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she was facing federal prison time for wire fraud. She figured if she was going down, she was going to burn my life's work to the ground on her way out. She wanted to force me into a public and emotional defense. She wanted me to go on television and scream about my innocence, which would only make me look exactly like the unhinged old man she claimed I was. Jonathan stopped pacing. He looked at me with deep concern. "Simon," he said urgently, "we have to issue a press release immediately. We have to threaten the blog with a defamation lawsuit and send a cease and desist to Megan. If we do not control this narrative by noon, we are going to lose 3 of our biggest shipping contracts, and the board will panic." I did not authorize a press release. I did not ask Jonathan to draft a desperate cease and desist letter. Begging the public for understanding is a strategy for people who have something to hide. I had the absolute truth. I turned my laptop around to face my attorney. "I am not going to argue with a desperate criminal on the internet," I told Jonathan. "I am going to let the math do the talking." I opened the secure corporate server. I located the complete and unredacted forensic audit of the Employee Pension Fund. The document was 300 pages of indisputable financial evidence. It traced every single dollar Aaron had stolen from my working-class employees. It showed the exact dates and times Aaron transferred the hard-earned retirement funds into offshore shell companies registered in Megan's name. It included receipts for 2 imported Italian sports cars. It detailed a $500,000 designer wardrobe. It even showed the luxury European cruise Megan had purchased for Thomas and Barbara just 3 months ago. Every single item was paid for with stolen blue-collar money. I did not just send the audit to the federal authorities. I uploaded the entire unredacted document directly to our public corporate website. I sent a mass email containing the download link to every major news outlet, every shipping client, and every single employee working on my cargo docks. I attached a single sentence to the email. "This is why Aaron is in federal custody." I pressed the enter key and closed my laptop. Jonathan stared at me in stunned silence. "You just published an active federal evidence file to the entire world," he whispered. "The privacy implications are massive." "My employees have a right to know exactly who robbed them," I replied calmly. "And my clients have a right to know that I caught the thief and cut him out of my company like a cancer." The internet is a vicious and highly efficient machine when provided with raw data. The gossip blog that published Megan's tearful story was immediately flooded with comments from investigative journalists, and they cross-referenced Megan's social media posts with the dates on the audit. They matched pictures of her posing with her new sports car to the exact day Aaron drained a massive sum from the dockworkers' pension account. Her narrative of being a victimized housewife shattered into a million pieces in less than an hour. The public realized she was not a terrified victim. She was a parasite wearing clothes bought with stolen retirement money. The backlash was immediate and violently unforgiving. The men and women who worked on my shipping docks did not care about high society drama. They cared about their families and their futures. When they read the audit and realized Aaron and Megan had systematically looted their retirement savings to buy designer handbags, their anger boiled over into the streets. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, over 200 maritime workers had gathered outside the federal courthouse. They wore their heavy work boots and high-visibility safety vests. They carried large signs demanding maximum prison sentences for Aaron and Megan. The local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the protest across the state. The shipping conglomerates that had threatened to cancel their contracts reversed their positions instantly. They issued public statements praising my swift and decisive action to root out corporate corruption. My company was no longer viewed as unstable. It was viewed as a fortress with an uncompromising leader. Megan became completely radioactive. She was sitting in a local coffee shop, trying to hide behind her dark sunglasses, when the news broke on the overhead television. A patron recognized her from the broadcast. He loudly pointed her out to the rest of the cafe. People began shouting at her, calling her a thief and a fraud. The barista refused to serve her. She was forced to run out of the building and flee down the street while angry citizens recorded her on their cell phones. She had tried to destroy my reputation in the court of public opinion. Instead, she had thrown herself into a highly public execution. Megan had absolutely nowhere else to hide. She managed to secure a ride back to the Palm Beach villa, desperate to seek refuge behind the tall iron gates of the estate she still believed she could claim. She ran up the long gravel driveway, her expensive heels slipping and sliding beneath her. She reached the front portico, expecting to find her parents waiting inside. She did not find her parents inside. She found 3 marked vehicles from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, parked directly on the pristine front lawn. The bank had not waited for a lengthy court battle. They had officially executed the emergency foreclosure clause on the $30 million toxic loan. A tall, broad-shouldered sheriff deputy stood on the front porch holding a heavy metal crowbar and a bright orange eviction notice. I watched the live security feed from my laptop as Megan froze at the base of the portico. The Palm Beach County Sheriff deputy did not care about her designer silk robe or her country club pedigree. He held up the bright orange foreclosure notice. He informed her that the bank had executed an immediate seizure of the property. The grace period was non-existent because the original deed transfer was flagged as a federal crime. Megan tried to argue. She screamed that she was the victim of a senile old man. The deputy ignored her entirely. He signaled to the team of men waiting behind him. They bypassed Megan and marched straight through the heavy mahogany front doors. Thomas and Barbara were dragged out next. Thomas tried to puff out his chest and intimidate the officers. An officer simply placed a hand on his utility belt, and Thomas shrunk back instantly. Barbara was crying uncontrollably. She clutched a cheap decorative vase to her chest as a deputy guided her down the front steps. They were escorted all the way down the long gravel driveway and forced to stand on the public sidewalk just outside the wrought iron gates. The eviction crew did not waste any time. They began hauling out the luxury furniture Megan had ordered using my stolen corporate funds. They dragged a white leather sectional sofa down the driveway and dumped it unceremoniously onto the concrete curb. They carried out the expensive modern art pieces Thomas had praised and tossed them onto the grass. Within 30 minutes, the pristine sidewalk outside my former estate looked like a disorganized garage sale. The suffocating afternoon heat radiated off the asphalt. Megan stood on the curb, staring at the bright orange padlock. The deputies clamped onto the front gates. Her parents sat heavily on the white leather sofa right in the middle of the sidewalk. They were entirely exposed to the wealthy neighbors driving past in their luxury sedans. The neighbors did not stop to help. They rolled up their tinted windows and drove a little faster. I sipped my tea, watching the empire they tried to steal turn into an absolute nightmare. They had demanded a palace, and now they were left with a pile of junk on a sweltering curb. The reality of their absolute ruin had finally arrived. Megan refused to accept her new reality. I watched through the high-definition camera mounted on the brick column near the front gate. The audio feed picked up her ragged, panicked breathing. She pulled her phone from her pocket. She began scrolling frantically through her contacts. She was looking for a lifeline from the high society country club friends she had spent years trying to impress. She dialed the number of the club president, a woman who had just attended a charity gala with Megan last month. The call went straight to voicemail. Megan dialed another friend, a woman she regularly played tennis with. Voicemail. She tried a third, a fourth, and a fifth number. Every single call was rejected. Her social circle had already seen the unredacted financial audit I published online. They had seen the news footage of the maritime workers protesting outside the federal courthouse. Megan was socially radioactive. No one in Palm Beach wanted to be associated with a woman who bought sports cars using stolen blue-collar pension funds. Finally, on the eighth attempt, someone answered. The audio feed captured the voice of the woman named Victoria coming through the phone speaker. "Victoria, thank God," Megan sobbed, pacing back and forth on the hot concrete. "You have to send a car for us." The bank made a massive mistake. My father-in-law went insane and locked our accounts. We are stranded outside the gates. Victoria did not offer a comforting word. Her voice was pure ice. "Do not ever call this number again, Megan. My husband does business with the shipping union. We saw the audit. You stole from working-class families so you could pretend you belonged in our zip code. You are a complete fraud." The line went dead. Megan stared at her phone in absolute disbelief. She dropped her arm to her side. Barbara began to wail loudly from her spot on the leather sofa. Thomas buried his face in his hands. The white picket fence fantasy they had chased by manipulating my son was dead. They had alienated the only man who could have given them a comfortable life, and they had alienated him simply because they thought his age and his race made him an easy target. Now they had absolutely no money, no home, and no friends. They were stranded in a world that only respects power, and they had just been stripped of every ounce of it. The camera feed hummed quietly as the afternoon sun baked the sidewalk. Suddenly, Megan's phone began to ring. It was not one of her wealthy friends returning a call. The automated voice of the Federal Detention Center echoed through the speaker. It was a collect call from an inmate. Megan answered the call and put it on speakerphone so she could wipe the sweat and tears from her face. Aaron's voice came through the line. He did not ask if she was safe. He did not offer any comfort. "This is all your fault," Aaron screamed through the jailhouse phone. The panic in his voice had hardened into vicious anger. "You pushed me to take that money. You told me we deserved a better lifestyle. You forced me to buy those cars and put the offshore accounts in your name." "I did not force you to do anything," Megan shrieked back at him. Her voice cracked with sheer desperation. "You told me you controlled the company. You told me your father was just an old fool who was ready to be pushed aside. You are weak, Aaron. You ruined my life. We are sitting on the sidewalk like garbage because you were too stupid to read a legal deed." "You bribed the doctor," Aaron yelled back. "You found Dr. Aris. You set up the psychiatric evaluation. I am telling the federal prosecutors everything. I am giving them your name, Megan. I will not sit in a federal penitentiary for 12 years while you try to walk away." The marriage shattered completely over the recorded line. There was no loyalty between thieves. They had built their relationship on arrogance and stolen money. Now that the money was gone, they only had their mutual hatred left to keep them company. Megan screamed a final curse at my son and threw her phone onto the grass. She collapsed onto the white leather sofa next to her mother, weeping uncontrollably. I was about to close the security feed on my laptop when something caught my eye. At the far end of the street, 3 unmarked black sedans turned the corner. They were not police cruisers. They moved slowly, crawling along the curb like sharks circling wounded prey. They came to a complete stop directly in front of the sidewalk where Megan and her parents were sitting. The hidden off the books private creditors Aaron had secretly borrowed from had finally arrived to collect their debts. The doors of the 3 black sedans opened simultaneously. I watched the live security feed on my laptop screen as 4 large men stepped out onto the sweltering concrete. They did not wear police uniforms or tactical vests. They wore casual street clothes, but their posture projected pure violence. They bypassed the dumped luxury furniture, ignoring the expensive modern art and the white leather sofa. They walked straight toward Megan. The lead man, a broad individual with a heavily scarred neck, stopped right in front of her. He did not yell. He did not make a scene for the wealthy neighbors watching from their windows. He spoke quietly. The hidden microphone mounted near my front gates caught every chilling word. He told Megan that Aaron owed his employers $2 million in short-term bridge loans. Aaron had promised these private lenders a massive, immediate return from a corporate real estate deal that had just evaporated into thin air. The man informed Megan that a debt does not just disappear because a husband goes to a federal holding cell. The lenders consider a marriage a joint financial venture. The spouse inherits the balance. Megan's face turned the color of wet ash. She realized the terrible, crushing truth of her lifestyle. Aaron had not just stolen from the pension funds of my hard-working employees. He had borrowed millions from violent off-the-books street lenders to sustain the illusion of infinite wealth. Megan finally understood that the designer clothes on her back and the sports cars she drove were partly funded by dangerous men who do not accept apologies or file civil lawsuits. She looked at the men surrounding her. She looked at her terrified parents sitting on the crushed cardboard boxes. Thomas and Barbara stared back at her, waiting for her to use her country club arrogance to fix the situation. Megan did not stay to defend them. She did not try to negotiate. Megan grabbed her designer purse, turned on her heels, and sprinted blindly down the street. She abandoned her mother and father on the curb with the loan sharks, running as fast as her legs could carry her away from the wreckage she had caused. I closed the laptop. The silence in my downtown condominium was absolute. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city of West Palm Beach stretched out below me, gleaming in the afternoon sun. I knew exactly where Megan was heading. She had no high society friends left to call. Her credit cards were seized by the federal government. Her husband was locked in a concrete cell. She only knew one person in the entire state of Florida who had the liquid cash to make $2 million in violent street debt go away. 45 minutes later, the security buzzer on my kitchen wall chimed loudly. The concierge of my high-rise building appeared on the digital video screen. He looked highly distressed. He informed me there was a frantic woman in the lobby demanding to see me. He said she was causing a major disturbance and refusing to leave the vestibule. I pressed the camera toggle button on the display. The screen switched from the concierge desk to the ground floor entryway. Megan was standing outside the heavy bulletproof glass doors of the building. She was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant woman who had marched into my villa just hours ago demanding I be put in a nursing home. Her designer silk robe was torn at the hem. Her hair was matted with sweat and panic. She had lost one of her expensive shoes somewhere during her frantic escape across town. She was slamming her bare fists against the reinforced glass, screaming my name. The security guards inside the lobby stood back, watching her unravel. She looked like a wild, cornered animal. She beat her hands against the glass until her knuckles were bruised raw and red. She lunged toward the external call box and slammed her finger against the intercom button, repeatedly desperate to breach the fortress I had built. I watched her panic with cold, detached precision. I spent decades working twice as hard just to be allowed into the lobbies of buildings like this. I built my fortune navigating rooms full of people who looked at me with the exact same disdain Megan had shown me this morning. Now she was on the outside, looking in, begging for access to the very empire she had tried to steal. I pressed the audio receiver button on my end. The connection clicked open. My voice echoed sharply out of the speaker panel in the empty lobby. Simon Megan sobbed into the microphone. The sound was distorted by her sheer panic and heavy breathing. "You have to let me upstairs. You have to call the bank and wire the money right now. There are men chasing me. They said Aaron owes them millions. They said they are going to hold me responsible. You have to protect me." I stared at her terrified face on the digital monitor. I felt absolutely no pity. You stood in my foyer this morning and told me I belonged in a nursing home, I said calmly. You laughed when you thought my mind was failing. You were perfectly happy to spend stolen money when you thought it belonged to my blue-collar workers. You tried to throw out my late wife's piano so you could build a wet bar. Now that the bill has come due from people who do not play by corporate rules, you suddenly remember I am your family. You cannot leave me out here, Megan screamed. She pounded the call box with her open palm. They are going to kill me. You have billions of dollars. 2 million is nothing to you. You can make them go away. I do not pay the debts of strangers, I replied. And I certainly do not negotiate with loan sharks to protect the woman who tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward. If you are in physical danger, I highly suggest you dial the police. I reached forward and pressed the red disconnect button. The intercom feed went completely dead. I watched the silent video monitor as Megan realized I was never going to open that door. Her shoulders collapsed. She looked over her shoulder at the busy downtown street, her eyes darting in every direction, terrified that a black sedan was about to pull up to the curb. Survival overrode her panic. The brutal reality of her situation crystallized in her mind. She realized that as long as she was legally married to Aaron, his violent creditors would hunt her down to collect his debts. She spun around and ran down the street, sprinting toward the county courthouse to file for an emergency divorce before the street lenders could collect their pound of flesh. Megan did not waste a single second mourning the collapse of her marriage. Less than 2 hours after I cut the intercom feed, my corporate attorney, Jonathan, sent me a secure encrypted email. It contained a scanned copy of an emergency divorce petition. Megan had sprinted directly from my downtown lobby to the county courthouse. She hired a notoriously aggressive family law attorney, likely promising him a percentage of a settlement she believed she could still extort. I sat at my kitchen island and read through the demands. The sheer scale of her delusion was staggering. The legal document demanded immediate and total dissolution of the marriage based on gross financial negligence and emotional abandonment. She was not just asking for a clean break. She was demanding $80,000 a month in permanent spousal support. She formally requested sole ownership of the 2 imported sports cars, the pre-ordered luxury yacht, and exclusive rights to her lifestyle brand shell companies. She genuinely believed that filing a piece of paper in a local family court would magically erase the violent street debt Aaron had accumulated. She thought a divorce decree was a magical shield that would make the black sedans circling her parents stop hunting for their $2 million. Jonathan called me as I finished reading the final page. He sounded almost amused. She is demanding half of his assets, Jonathan stated over the phone. She does not understand that half of zero is absolutely nothing, and half of a $30 million toxic deficit is just $15 million of personal liability. Megan assumed she could just pack up the stolen money and walk away as an innocent, victimized housewife. She failed to realize that in the state of Florida, a judge does not just divide the bank accounts. The judge divides the debts. By aggressively rushing to the courthouse to sever herself from Aaron, she had legally forced a mandatory financial discovery phase. She had just demanded a full accounting of every single dollar they had spent over the past 2 years. The family court system moves slowly, but Megan pushed for an expedited emergency hearing to secure her alimony before the loan sharks could find her. To do that, she was forced to submit a sworn financial affidavit. She listed her lifestyle brand as a completely independent, highly profitable business. She conveniently left out the fact that her business was entirely funded by the $4 million Aaron embezzled from my dock workers' pension fund. She thought the family court judge would simply glance at the paperwork and grant her a monthly check. She forgot that Aaron was currently sitting in a federal holding cell under an active investigation by the Financial Crimes Division. The Federal Bureau of Investigation monitors everything. When Megan filed her financial affidavit in the county court, the federal prosecutors immediately seized the document. They cross-referenced her sworn income with the missing corporate funds. The discrepancy was massive and completely undeniable. The federal agents did not ask for permission. They launched a total forensic audit of Meghan's personal offshore accounts. I watched the financial demolition unfold from my laptop. The federal auditors bypassed the local jurisdiction and traced the wire transfers directly to the Cayman Islands. They found the hidden accounts where Meghan had been hoarding the stolen pension money. She had been preparing her escape fund for months, long before the bank seized the Palm Beach villa. She thought she was a financial genius for moving the cash across international borders. She did not realize that federal agents have absolute authority to track stolen corporate assets anywhere in the world. By rushing into a messy public divorce to save herself from the street lenders, she had handed the federal government a perfectly documented, legally binding roadmap directly to her hidden vault. She turned a spotlight on the exact crimes she was trying to outrun. The federal audit took less than 48 hours to complete. The auditors did not just find the stolen money sitting in Meghan's offshore accounts. They found the digital paper trail that moved the money there. Meghan had always claimed she was just an innocent housewife who had no idea how Aaron funded their lavish lifestyle. The audit proved that was a complete lie. The federal agents uncovered dozens of fraudulent corporate loan documents and fake vendor invoices. Aaron had not just forged the numbers. Meghan had personally signed her name as the chief executive officer of the shell companies receiving the stolen funds. Her signature was on every single fraudulent wire transfer. She was the one approving the laundering of the pension money. The federal prosecutors did not wait for the family court to rule on her alimony request. They bypassed the divorce proceedings entirely. At 6 o'clock on a Thursday morning, federal agents kicked down the door of the cheap roadside motel where Meghan had been hiding from the loan sharks. They dragged her out in handcuffs. Her attempt to escape her marriage had directly resulted in her own federal indictment. She was charged with money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement. I felt a deep, profound sense of justice knowing she would be locked in a concrete cell right next to my son. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea and turned off my computer. The purge of my company was finally complete. The people who tried to destroy me were entirely ruined by their own greed. A sharp, heavy knock on my condominium door broke the silence. I walked across the hardwood floor and opened the door. A stern man in a dark suit stood in the hallway. He did not introduce himself. He held out a thick manila envelope. "You have been served," the man stated coldly. He turned and walked down the hall. I opened the envelope. It was a federal subpoena. I was being ordered to testify under oath at the grand jury hearing against my own son. The heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse swung shut behind me. The chaotic noise of the press corps in the hallway was instantly severed. It was replaced by the suffocating, heavy silence of absolute federal authority. I walked down the center aisle with my head held high. My leather shoes clicked firmly against the polished marble floor. I kept my posture completely rigid. Decades of walking into hostile, predominantly white corporate boardrooms had taught me exactly how to wear an armor of absolute calm. I approached the witness box and placed my scarred hand on the Bible. The clerk administered the oath. I swore to tell the whole truth without hesitation. I took my seat and adjusted the microphone. I looked directly across the wide room. Aaron sat at the defense table. He looked absolutely hollow. His tailored executive suits and arrogance were entirely gone. They were replaced by a drab institutional jumpsuit that swallowed his frame. His hands were clasped together tightly on the polished wood. He stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. He was silently pleading with me. I recognized that specific look of raw terror. It was the exact same expression he wore when he was a young boy who had just broken a window, begging me to shield him from the consequences. He desperately wanted me to lie. I wanted me to sit in a federal courthouse, commit perjury, and tell the grand jury that I had authorized his massive offshore withdrawals. He wanted me to claim that the forged medical proxy was just a tragic misunderstanding born out of a son's genuine concern for his aging father. Aaron firmly believed that the unbreakable bond of family would force me to protect him from the justice system. He gambled on the premise that a black father would rather sacrifice his own legacy than watch his son be swallowed by a federal prison. The federal prosecutor stepped up to the podium. She asked me to state my name and my former position at the logistics firm for the official record. I answered her clearly. Then she held up the fraudulent medical evaluation signed by Dr. Eris. She asked me if I had ever exhibited signs of severe cognitive decline. Aaron leaned forward in his chair. He held his breath. The entire courtroom waited for my answer. I looked at Aaron one last time before I spoke. I vividly remembered the endless nights I spent reviewing cargo manifests at the kitchen table while he slept safely down the hall. I built a massive fortress of wealth so my son would never know the brutal sting of poverty I grew up with. I realized in that quiet courtroom that my extreme protection had mutated into a poison. Shielding him from every hardship had completely stripped him of his integrity. I turned my gaze away from my son and looked directly at the grand jury box. I told the prosecutor that my cognitive health was flawless. I explained that I had never met Dr. Eris in my entire life. I detailed exactly how my son had orchestrated a midnight meeting in my own home office to hand a corrupt physician an envelope stuffed with $10,000 in cash. A collective gasp rippled through the jury box. The prosecutor then projected the unredacted corporate audit onto the large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls. She asked me to formally verify the unauthorized transfers. I did not hesitate for a single second. I walked the jury through the exact timeline of Aaron's embezzlement. I explained how he systematically drained $4 million from the retirement accounts of the men and women who had broken their backs loading freight on my docks. I described how the stolen funds were funneled into offshore shell companies managed entirely by Megan. I laid out the paper trail showing those stolen funds being converted into imported sports cars, designer jewelry, and a luxury yacht. Aaron dropped his head onto the defense table. His shoulders shook violently as he began to weep. He realized I was not going to throw him a lifeline. The defense attorney stood up and frantically objected. He attempted to discredit my testimony by citing the sheer improbability of a father testifying so ruthlessly against his own flesh and blood. The judge overruled the objection immediately. I clarified for the court that my loyalty to my family does not supersede my obligation to the working-class employees who trusted me with their futures. I refused to let innocent dock workers lose their pensions so my son could pretend he was a titan of industry. I testified for exactly 2 hours. I answered every single question with cold, indisputable facts. I stripped away every lie Aaron and Megan had constructed. I laid their staggering greed bare for the federal government to examine. When the prosecutor finally stated she had no further questions, I stepped down from the witness stand. The grand jury did not require a lengthy deliberation period to reach their conclusion. The combination of my unyielding testimony, the high-definition security footage of the medical bribe, and the comprehensive paper trail of the offshore accounts left absolutely no room for doubt. Later that afternoon, the foreperson handed the official documentation to the judge. The grand jury formally indicted Aaron and Megan on every single federal charge. They were officially indicted for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Their fate was permanently sealed by the very man they had tried to throw away like expired garbage. Aaron was remanded back into federal custody without bail. Megan was formally processed and stripped of any remaining dignity she thought she possessed. They had demanded a royal palace, and now they were both facing decades inside a concrete federal penitentiary. I walked out of the courthouse and stepped into the blistering Florida heat. My corporate Jonathan walked beside me. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder, acknowledging the heavy emotional toll of putting my own son behind bars. I did not feel any joy or triumph. I simply felt the profound, quiet peace of restoring absolute order to my life and protecting my workers. I had excised the infection that was killing my legacy. I climbed into the back of my waiting car. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the loud circus of news reporters far behind us. I genuinely thought the war was finally over. I thought the remaining members of Megan's family would possess the basic intelligence to retreat into the shadows and salvage whatever miserable existence they had left. I vastly underestimated the sheer bottomless delusion of her parents. My phone buzzed in my pocket just as we merged onto the highway. Jonathan looked at his own screen, his brow furrowed in deep, sudden confusion. Thomas and Barbara had just visited a local county courthouse. Completely bankrupt and stranded in a cheap roadside motel, they had just filed a massive civil lawsuit against me. They were suing me for millions of dollars in damages, citing severe emotional distress, financial ruin, and a ridiculous claim of a breach of verbal contract regarding their living arrangements. They actually believed they could extract a massive cash settlement from me to buy a new house. The thick manila envelope was delivered directly to the concierge desk of my downtown condominium. I carried it upstairs and tossed it onto the kitchen island. Jonathan sat on one of the leather bar stools, sipping his morning coffee. He picked up the envelope, unsealed the flap, and pulled out a stack of heavily stapled legal documents. I watched his eyes scan the first page. A sharp, genuine bark of laughter erupted from his chest. It was a rare sound for a corporate attorney who usually dealt in federal indictments and multi-million-dollar acquisitions. Jonathan slid the papers across the granite surface toward me. Thomas and Barbara actually found a bottom-feeding civil lawyer, desperate enough to take their case on contingency, Jonathan said, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. They filed a civil lawsuit against you in county court this morning. They are suing you for $5 million in damages. I looked down at the poorly drafted legal complaint. The sheer delusion required to file this document was staggering. Thomas and Barbara were claiming severe emotional distress. They alleged that I had intentionally inflicted psychological trauma by evicting them from the Palm Beach villa without warning. Furthermore, they claimed a breach of verbal contract. They legally argued that by allowing Aaron to hand them the keys to my house, I had implicitly guaranteed them a permanent, rent-free retirement in the state of Florida. They sold their modest home in Ohio based on a fantasy my son fabricated, and they honestly believed I was financially responsible for their gullibility. They are completely bankrupt and living in a cheap roadside motel, Jonathan explained, tapping his finger against the paper. They know this lawsuit has absolutely no legal merit. No judge in the state will uphold a verbal contract for real estate, especially when the property was seized in a federal mortgage fraud investigation. This is a classic extortion tactic. They are hoping you will offer them a quick cash settlement just to make the public embarrassment go away. They want you to write them a check for a few $100,000 so they can buy a new house and disappear. I picked up the stack of papers and dropped them directly into the shredder sitting next to my desk. I listened to the sharp grinding of the metal blades chewing up their ridiculous demands. I do not pay extortion money, I stated clearly. I spent the early days of my shipping career dealing with corrupt port officials and aggressive union bosses who tried to squeeze me for every dollar I earned. I refused to let them take what I built with my own two hands. I did not back down then, and I certainly will not back down for a pair of arrogant, entitled squatters who marched into my home and told me I belonged in a medical ward. We are not offering them a single dime in settlement money. Jonathan smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that told me he was entirely ready for a fight. I was hoping you would say that, Jonathan replied. He reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of legal filings. I took the liberty of drafting our response last night the moment I heard a rumor they were shopping for a civil attorney. We are not just filing a motion to dismiss their ridiculous claims. We are going to bury them under a massive mountain of aggressive counter-litigation. Jonathan laid out the strategy with surgical precision. We were filing a brutal civil countersuit against Thomas and Barbara. The first charge was criminal trespassing on a private estate. The second charge was attempted extortion. But the third charge was the absolute killing blow. We were officially suing them for active complicity in elder abuse. I instructed Jonathan to attach the high-definition security footage from my foyer directly to the countersuit. The cameras had recorded Megan explicitly telling me she had selected a nursing facility for me while Thomas sneered and handed me a cheap printed brochure. They had actively participated in a vile conspiracy to unlawfully evict a 70-year-old man from his primary residence by weaponizing a fraudulent dementia diagnosis. This countersuit is going to trigger an immediate, mandatory financial discovery phase, Jonathan explained, packing his heavy documents back into his briefcase. We are going to demand a full accounting of their remaining finances. We will depose them under oath and force them to admit they knew Aaron was funding their luxury lifestyle with stolen corporate money. They thought they could use the local legal system as a weapon to bully a wealthy man into submission. We are going to show them exactly how the legal system operates when it is wielded by someone who actually knows how to strike back with overwhelming force. File it immediately, I ordered without hesitation. Make them face reality today. The civil hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later in the county courthouse. Thomas and Barbara sat at the plaintiff table. They wore cheap, wrinkled clothing. The stress of living in a budget roadside motel had rapidly aged them both. Their contingency lawyer stood up to present their fabricated claims of emotional trauma. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a deep intolerance for frivolous litigation, did not even let him finish his opening statement. She held up our countersuit, specifically pointing to the flash drive containing the security footage from my foyer. She had reviewed the video evidence in her chambers that morning. Your clients marched into this man's private residence, insulted his mental capacity, and handed him a brochure for a nursing facility while attempting to seize his property, the judge stated, her voice echoing harshly across the silent courtroom. Now they have the absolute audacity to stand in my courtroom and claim they are the victims of emotional distress because they were lawfully evicted from a house they never owned. I am throwing this lawsuit out with extreme prejudice. The lawyer stammered, trying to salvage his case, but the judge slammed her gavel down instantly. Furthermore, the judge continued, looking directly at Thomas and Barbara. I am ruling entirely in favor of the defendant's countersuit. You attempted to use this court to extort a settlement from a victim of elder abuse. I am holding you fully liable for the defendant's legal fees, court costs, and punitive damages for trespassing and attempted extortion. Thomas dropped his head onto the wooden table. Barbara began to weep loudly, realizing the catastrophic magnitude of their mistake. My legal fees were not cheap. Jonathan was one of the most expensive corporate litigators in the state. The total judgment against them exceeded $150,000. They had already sold their home in Ohio. They had drained their meager retirement accounts to pay for the moving trucks. The judge's order officially bankrupted them. They were left with absolutely nothing, permanently trapped in a cycle of unpayable debt. I walked out of the civil courthouse with Jonathan, leaving them sobbing at the table. The final loose end of Megan's family was completely severed. We stepped out into the bright morning sun, knowing the final, most devastating chapter was about to unfold. The official date for Aaron and Megan's final federal sentencing hearing had officially arrived. The federal courtroom felt significantly colder than the holding cells I had visited weeks prior. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing the exact same dark charcoal suit I wore when I first laid the foundation of my maritime logistics company. I kept my posture completely rigid, refusing to show a single ounce of emotion to the reporters swarming the back benches. The heavy oak doors at the front of the room swung open. 2 armed United States Marshals escorted Aaron and Megan into the courtroom. The visual transformation was absolute and staggering. The arrogant executive who wore tailored silk suits and commanded boardrooms with my money was entirely gone. Aaron shuffled forward in a shapeless, faded orange prison jumpsuit. His wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against the polished hardwood floor with every step. Megan walked 2 steps behind him, her head bowed in profound disgrace. Her pristine blonde hair hung in greasy, unkempt strands. The designer silk robes and aggressive entitlement she wielded like a weapon on my driveway had been stripped away by the federal penal system. She looked fragile, terrifyingly ordinary, and completely broken. They were directed to sit at the defense table. Neither of them looked at each other. The vicious infighting over the recorded jailhouse phone line had permanently severed their toxic partnership. They were no longer the untouchable power couple of Palm Beach. They were just 2 federal inmates awaiting their assigned prison numbers. I watched my son sink heavily into the hard wooden chair, his shoulders slumped forward, utterly defeated by the massive weight of the federal indictment. He finally turned his head slowly and looked at me. There was no defiance left in his eyes. There was only a hollow, suffocating panic. I did not offer him a comforting nod. I did not break my stoic expression. I simply stared back at the man who had bribed a corrupt physician to lock me inside a psychiatric ward so he could steal the pensions of my blue-collar workers. The presiding judge, a stern woman with decades of experience handling white-collar criminals, entered the room and took her seat at the high bench. She opened the thick sentencing dossier containing the undeniable proof of their staggering greed. The gavel struck the sounding block with a sharp, definitive crack. The time for maneuvering and legal manipulation had officially expired. The judge instructed Aaron to stand and deliver his final statement to the court before she rendered her binding decision. Aaron gripped the edges of the defense table to steady his violently shaking legs. He cleared his throat, but his voice emerged as a fragile, pathetic whisper. He turned to face the judge, tears streaming rapidly down his cheeks. He spoke of his profound regret and deep shame. He claimed the intense pressure to maintain a certain high society lifestyle had clouded his moral judgment. He blamed the toxic culture of wealth for corrupting his values, painting himself as a victim of his own environment. Then he turned to face me directly in the gallery. He wept openly, begging for my forgiveness in front of the entire courtroom. He invoked the memory of my late wife, Cynthia, claiming he had completely lost his way after her death. He swore that he never truly intended to hurt me, asserting that the medical injunction was a misguided, desperate attempt to protect the family estate from financial ruin. He pleaded for leniency, promising he would spend the rest of his life making amends to the dock workers and to me. The judge raised her hand, silencing his desperate monologue instantly. She looked down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. "You are not crying because you feel genuine remorse," the judge stated, her voice slicing through the silent courtroom like a surgical blade. "You are crying because your offshore accounts were frozen. Your luxury villa was seized, and you were caught on high-definition security footage, handing $10,000 to a fraudulent doctor. You felt absolutely no guilt when you systematically drained $4 million from the retirement accounts of hardworking maritime employees over the course of 2 years. You did not hesitate for a second when you signed forged loan documents to buy your wife imported sports cars. You only found your conscience when your father outsmarted you and the federal agents placed you in handcuffs." The judge picked up the fake psychiatric evaluation Aaron had purchased. She held it up high for the entire room to see. "You attempted to strip a 70-year-old man of your basic human rights," the judge continued relentlessly. "You tried to erase your own father's freedom to secure your stolen wealth. That is not a misguided mistake caused by grief. That is a calculated, predatory, and deeply evil conspiracy. Do not insult the intelligence of this court by blaming your lifestyle. You made a conscious choice to become a thief." Aaron collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his chained hands. The judge then turned her sharp gaze toward Megan. The judge did not ask Megan for a statement. The documented evidence of her signing the fraudulent offshore wire transfers spoke volumes. The judge adjusted her microphone and delivered the final ruling with absolute authority. Aaron, for the crimes of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud, I sentence you to 12 years in a federal penitentiary." The heavy finality of the number hit the room like a physical blow. Aaron let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob that echoed off the granite walls. The judge immediately shifted her severe gaze to Megan. "For your active role in laundering stolen pension funds and signing fraudulent corporate documents, I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison." Megan gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer horror. She looked wildly around the courtroom, expecting someone to intervene and save her from the catastrophic consequences she had earned. No one moved. The judge slammed her gavel down, formally closing the proceedings without another word. The armed marshals stepped forward instantly. They grabbed Aaron and Megan by the arms, hauling them up from the defense table. The chains around their ankles dragged heavily across the marble floor as they were led toward the side exit. Just before they reached the heavy steel doors leading back to the subterranean holding cells, Aaron turned his head and looked back at me one final time. I was looking for a trace of the father who had shielded him from the harsh world for 35 years. He was looking for a sign that I would eventually forgive him and welcome him back into my life. I did not blink. I did not nod. I maintained a cold, unwavering stare until the steel door slammed shut behind him, cutting him off from the free world for the next decade. I stood up from the wooden gallery bench and smoothed the front of my charcoal suit. The cancer that had been silently killing my family and my legacy was finally excised. I walked out of the federal courthouse and stepped into the blinding afternoon sun. My driver was waiting by the curb. I instructed him to take me directly to the downtown commercial center. The trial was over, but the actual work was just beginning. I rode the elevator to the top floor of my building and pushed open the glass doors. I walked into the massive empty corporate boardroom. I stood alone in the deafening silence, looking at the long mahogany table, realizing I now had to clean up the catastrophic wreckage my son had left behind. I stepped out of the elevator on the top floor of my commercial building. The federal trial was behind me, but the rot inside my company was still festering. I walked straight down the executive hallway. The junior staff parted like the Red Sea, keeping their eyes glued to their monitors. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the main boardroom. 7 senior executives sat around the long mahogany table. They were the men and women who had watched Aaron loot the employee pension fund for 2 years and did absolutely nothing to stop him. They fell dead silent when I walked into the room. I walked directly to the head of the table. I pulled out the heavy leather chair and sat down. I placed a thick stack of termination papers on the polished wood. The chief financial officer, a man who had worked for me for 10 years, tried to offer a nervous smile. He started to say he was glad I was back to guide the ship and that they were ready to move past this unfortunate chapter. I raised my hand and cut him off instantly. I told him he was a coward. I told the entire room that they were entirely complicit in the theft of $4 million. They knew Aaron was forging the accounting records. They knew he was funneling blue-collar money into Megan's offshore shell companies. They stayed quiet because they wanted to protect their own massive bonuses and comfortable corner offices. I did not ask for their resignations. I fired all 7 of them effective immediately. The chief financial officer tried to argue, claiming he was just following the legal orders of the acting executive vice president. I reminded him that his fiduciary duty was to the company and its workers, not to a spoiled thief playing businessman. I pressed the button on the intercom and summoned the building security team. I ordered the armed guards to escort the executives to their desks, confiscate their company keys, and march them out the front doors into the public lobby. I watched them pack their expensive briefcases in absolute humiliation. I had spent 40 years building a culture of integrity. I was not going to let a room full of cowards poison the water any longer. The boardroom was finally empty, but the company was bleeding. I needed a leader who actually knew the weight of a shipping container. I left the sterile air conditioning of the executive floor and drove my sedan directly to the primary shipping yards. The brutal Florida heat hit me the moment I stepped out of the car. The air smelled heavily of salt water, diesel exhaust, and hot asphalt. This was the real heart of my empire. I walked past the towering steel cranes and the endless rows of heavy cargo containers. I was looking for Corey. Corey was a shift foreman who had been loading freight on my docks for 20 years. I was a man who led by example, working brutal 12-hour shifts without a single complaint or excuse. I found him near the loading bay, wiping thick sweat from his forehead with a stained rag. He looked surprised to see me walking through the active loading zone in my tailored charcoal suit. I walked up to him and shook his heavy, calloused hand. I told him to clock out and come to the main office immediately. Corey wiped his hands on his denim jeans and followed me into the small concrete break room overlooking the water. I did not waste time with corporate pleasantries. I told Corey that I had just fired the entire executive board for turning a blind eye to Aaron's embezzlement. I told him the company desperately needed a vice president who actually understood the value of the workers. I offered Corey the position right there in the break room. He stared at me in absolute shock. He said he did not have an Ivy League degree or a background in high finance. I told him those were the exact reasons I trusted him. I needed a man with a spine, not a man with a fancy piece of paper. Corey accepted the job with a firm nod. I then asked him to gather every single dock worker, crane operator, and logistics manager in the main cargo hangar. Within 20 minutes, over 300 men and women stood before me in their high-visibility safety vests. They looked anxious and defeated. They had all seen the public audit. They knew their retirement accounts had been completely drained by my son. I stood on top of a wooden shipping crate so they could all hear me clearly. I looked at the crowd of hard-working people who relied on me to protect their families. I announced that I had personally liquidated several of my private real estate investments that morning. I transferred $4 million of my own personal wealth directly into the employee pension fund. I restored every single stolen dollar out of my own pocket. I told them their futures were entirely secure. A wave of profound relief washed over the massive cargo hangar. The absolute silence broke into a deafening roar of applause. The men and women who had broken their backs for my company cheered. They did not just clap. They banged their heavy steel wrenches against the shipping containers, creating a thunderous rhythm of genuine respect. Corey stood beside me on the wooden crate, looking out at the workers with deep pride. The maritime logistics empire I had built was finally stable. The toxic elements were completely eradicated, and the people who actually kept the ships moving were made entirely whole. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the docks, shaking hands and looking my employees directly in the eyes. When the sun began to set over the Atlantic Ocean, I drove back to my downtown condominium. I sat at my granite kitchen island in the quiet, empty room. I poured myself a cup of black tea and watched the city lights flicker on. I had won the war. I had sent my son to a federal penitentiary and reclaimed my business from the brink of total collapse. But as I sat there in the silence, a cold realization crept into my mind. I was 70 years old. I had survived a massive betrayal because I had the mental sharpness and the hidden capital to fight back. But I was not immortal. If I suffered a stroke tomorrow, or if my heart finally gave out, the massive $28 million fortune I had amassed would become vulnerable all over again. The state probate courts would step in. Distant relatives or aggressive corporate raiders would circle my assets like starving vultures. I had spent my entire life building a fortress, but a fortress is completely useless if the gates are left unlocked after the king dies. I could not let another greedy opportunist dismantle the legacy I built for my late wife and my workers. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed my corporate attorney. Jonathan answered the phone immediately, expecting a routine update on the company transition. I did not give him a routine update. I told Jonathan to clear his schedule for the entire weekend. I ordered him to draft an ironclad, irrevocable legal structure regarding every single asset, property, and dollar to my name. I was going to lock my $28 million fortune away permanently. Jonathan arrived at my condominium exactly at 8 o'clock the following Monday morning. He carried a fresh stack of thick, legal-sized documents bound in heavy blue folders. I poured him a cup of black coffee and we sat at the granite kitchen island. This was not a standard will or a revocable living trust that a clever lawyer could contest in a probate court. We were constructing an impenetrable financial fortress. I instructed Jonathan to establish an irrevocable charitable trust. My entire $28 million fortune, including the liquid bank assets, the commercial real estate, and the majority voting shares of the maritime logistics company, was permanently transferred into this new entity. I made sure Jonathan included a highly specific, airtight exclusion clause. The legal language explicitly stated that Aaron Megan and any future descendants or legal representatives associated with them were permanently barred from claiming a single penny of my wealth. If they ever attempted to sue the estate, the trust was armed with an automatic defense fund designed to bankrupt them, with aggressive counter-litigation. The money had a new vital purpose. I named it the Cynthia Vanguard Foundation. The entire trust was structured to provide massive unconditional grants and commercial scholarships to underprivileged minority entrepreneurs. I wanted to find young, ambitious black men and women who were staring at the exact same closed doors I faced back in 1982. I wanted to find people who knew what it felt like to have a bank deny their business loan application simply because of their zip code. The foundation would provide the direct seed money they needed to buy their own rusted barges, their own commercial fleets, and their own real estate. I signed the final page with a heavy gold pen. Jonathan stamped the notary seal. The ink dried in seconds. The fortune I had bled for was officially locked away from greedy hands forever. My wealth would no longer be used to buy imported sports cars for arrogant socialites. It would be used to build 100 new empires for people who actually understood the value of hard work. I left the condominium later that afternoon and drove my sedan toward the eastern edge of the city. The noise of downtown West Palm Beach faded away, replaced by the quiet, shaded roads, lined with ancient weeping willows and Spanish moss. I turned through the wrought iron gates of the Memorial Park and parked my car. The air was thick with the humid Florida heat, but a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt water from the nearby ocean. I walked down the manicured stone path until I reached a quiet spot beneath a massive oak tree. The polished black granite headstone rested in the cool shade. I knelt down slowly and brushed a single fallen brown leaf away from the engraved letters of Cynthia's name. I traced the dates of her life with my scarred thumb. I had avoided coming here for the past 10 months because I carried a suffocating weight of guilt. I had felt entirely responsible for letting our son turn into a monster. Today, that heavy guilt was completely gone. I sat on the soft grass and spoke to my wife in the quiet stillness of the cemetery. I told her the absolute truth. I confessed the deep, agonizing pain of watching federal marshals place our only child in steel handcuffs. I admitted that a part of my heart would always mourn the little boy she had taught to play the piano in our first cramped apartment. But I also told her that I had finally stopped trying to save a man who actively chose to destroy us. I told Cynthia about the foundation, about the irrevocable trust, and about the young entrepreneurs who would build their futures using the wealth she helped me create. I reminded her of the days she helped me scrape the rust off my very first barge covered in grease and smiling through the exhaustion. I explained that our legacy was no longer tied to the biological son who betrayed us. Our legacy was now permanently tied to the survival and success of our community. As I spoke the words aloud, the final lingering knot of anxiety in my chest dissolved entirely. I did not feel the bitter sting of revenge. I felt a profound, overwhelming peace. I had done the right thing. I had protected the dock workers. I had protected the shipping company. I had protected her memory from being tarnished by thieves. I placed a fresh bouquet of white lilies at the base of the headstone. I stood up, brushed the dirt from the knees of my suit, and said a final goodbye. I left the cemetery with my head held high, walking with the steady rhythm of a man who had finally put his house in absolute order. I drove to the coastline, just as the late afternoon sky began to turn brilliant shades of violet and deep orange. I parked my car and took off my leather shoes. I walked barefoot across the warm, fine sand of Palm Beach. To my right, the massive, sprawling luxury villas sat behind their high hedges and reinforced security gates. Just a few weeks ago, I owned the largest property on this very stretch of coastline. I had lived behind those tall iron fences, trapped in a gilded cage with a son who saw me as an expiring asset. Now I looked at those mansions and felt absolutely nothing. I did not miss the vaulted ceilings or the imported Italian marble. I walked down to the water edge and let the cool ocean waves wash over my feet. I looked out at the horizon and saw the faint, massive silhouettes of commercial cargo ships moving slowly across the deep water. Those were my ships. That was the bloodline of my empire operating flawlessly. The rhythmic crashing of the tide was the only sound for miles. I was completely alone on the beach. I had no immediate family left to call. I had no one waiting for me in a grand dining room. But as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I realized I was not lonely in the slightest. I felt an incredible, undeniable sense of connection to the world around me. I thought about Corey stepping into his new role as vice president, managing the shipping docks with pure integrity. I thought about the hundreds of maritime workers heading home to their families with their retirement pensions fully secured. I thought about the young entrepreneurs who would soon receive the phone call that their commercial grants were fully funded. I had reclaimed my empire by stripping away the toxic greed that had infected it. I had reclaimed my dignity by refusing to bow to the arrogant entitlement of people who despised me. Above all, I had reclaimed my absolute freedom. I stood on the shore as the stars began to pierce the darkening sky. The storm that had ripped through my life was entirely over. The wreckage was cleared away. The foundation was rebuilt on solid rock. I turned away from the ocean and walked back up the beach toward my car. The story of my fortune was no longer a tragedy about a stolen inheritance. It was a testament to the quiet, unbreakable power of a man who remembered exactly who he was. 6 months after the trial concluded, the ocean breeze carried the harsh, metallic scent of a working shipyard. I stood on the edge of the commercial docks in Miami, watching the heavy cranes load cargo onto waiting freighters. I was no longer fighting battles within my own family. My war had shifted to the future. A young man named Jordan stood near a stack of shipping containers. He was one of the first recipients of the Cynthia Vanguard Foundation grants. He had purchased 2 commercial transport boats aiming to build his own logistics route. Today his shoulders were slumped. A port inspector stood in front of him, holding a clipboard and shaking his head. I walked over my leather shoes, quiet against the concrete. The inspector was demanding an exorbitant, unrecorded fee to clear Jordan's vessels for departure. The man smirked, telling Jordan that new operators needed to pay a specific toll to operate in his jurisdiction. The extortion was thinly veiled, but the racial undertone was entirely transparent. It was the exact same corrupt tariff a harbor master tried to force upon me in 1982 when I launched my first rusted barge. I stepped between them. I did not raise my voice. I informed the inspector that I personally held the lease for the entire commercial dock. I recited the exact federal maritime regulations regarding cargo clearance. I then pulled out my phone and dialed the regional director of the Port Authority, a man whose political campaign I had legally and heavily funded. The inspector dropped his arrogant smirk instantly. The color drained from his face as he recognized who I was. He stamped Jordan's clearance papers with shaking hands and quickly walked away. Jordan looked at me, profound gratitude mixed with exhaustion in his eyes. He admitted he had almost given up, feeling the system was rigged against him. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I told him the system was indeed rigged, which was exactly why we had to be stronger than the steel we shipped. I had spent my life building a door so men like him could walk through it. I refused to let anyone lock that door again. Watching Jordan's vessels leave the harbor, the final pieces of my soul settled into place. The fortune I built was no longer a target for greedy heirs. It was a shield for the next generation. My legacy was secure, forged in truth, and completely unbreakable. True power does not reside in the accumulation of wealth, but in the unwavering preservation of your own dignity. We often sacrifice our peace to protect the people we love, blinding ourselves to their toxic entitlement. Generosity without firm boundaries breeds dangerous arrogance. When family treats you as a disposable resource, walking away is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate expression of profound respect. You cannot buy genuine loyalty, and you should never finance your own destruction. The greatest legacy you can build is a life rooted in absolute truth, strict boundaries, and uncompromising personal honor forever. Did my story resonate with you? Let me know which part of this journey impacted you the most down in the comments. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to protect their peace. Stand strong, and I will see you in the next story.